When Donald Trump mocked Paul Pelosi getting beaten over the head with a hammer, was that okay? When Mike Lee, senator from Utah, mocked the murder of Melissa Hortman and her husband on Twitter, was that okay? You keep talking about political violence, but every major Democrat has condemned any violence. I would condemn anybody at these protests saying they want to take the lives of any conservatives. But your guy pardoned people who beat police officers over the head.
Piers Morgan recently had left-wing political commentator Harry Sisson on to talk about MAGA's meltdown over the No Kings protests this last weekend, which included Donald Trump posting an AI-generated video of him flying a jet and dropping literal human feces on Americans in response. Joining the show was also Trump apologist Isabel Brown from The Wire, and MAGA lunatic Jack Posobiec, who, as expected, jumped through Olympic-level hoops to justify this juvenile nonsense. This video mostly focuses on exchanges between Harry Sisson and Isabel Brown. As usual, I'm going to drop my thoughts along the way, and I encourage you to join the conversation in the comments, so let's let the clip rip.
President Trump chose to respond to the weekend's protest by sharing an AI-generated video of himself flying a fighter jet loaded with effluent, which he deposited with surgical accuracy on a friend of his show, Harry Sisson. Well, Harry, you're the man of the moment, the man of the memes. Just be honest with me here. When you first saw that meme involving excrement being deposited on you, did you laugh?
No, I don't think the president behaving in this way is funny. I think we have to hold our leaders to a higher standard. That's something that you typically see in my Twitter comments from like some MAGA boomer who spends their time making AI videos all day. It's not something you'd really hope to see from the president of the United States. But alas, we are here. This is the guy leading our country. He's not serious. And I don't actually think he cares about anybody but himself. And I think he's more interested in social media beef with a 23-year-old, as the vice president is, than he is in leading the country.
I mean, you managed to say all that with a completely straight face, but your side have done endless, incredibly mocking, humiliating memes about Trump. I mean, you'd accept that.
Like what?
So as usual, the self-described independent, middle of the road, above the fray, Piers Morgan is going to try to position this as some sort of both sides debate, as if there's any credible political personality on the left who has ever done anything as absurd as create an AI-generated video of them flying a jet and dropping literal shit on top of the opposition. I mean, just the absurdity of the framing of this right here is just so ridiculous. It's hard to even know where to start. It's just so disingenuous, and I get really, really exhausted by listening to Piers Morgan pretend that he's anything but hard leaning towards MAGA. But let's keep ripping the clip.
Like what?
Well, I mean, I could get literally 1,000 if you gave me half an hour to find them. I mean, it's not a secret.
Can you give me a couple examples from like high-ranking limited?
Well, it's not a secret that the left do memes about Trump, right?
Can you give me some examples from high-ranking Democrats that are similar to this?
Well, okay. Let me flip the question around. Are you saying there have never been any mocking memes of Trump by anybody on the left in America?
No, that's not what I'm saying at all. I'm asking for like high-level prominent Democrats who might be in a similar position.
Okay,
to Trump,
well, Gavin Newsom has done a lot of memes on Trump. I mean, do you distance yourself from those?
Has he done an AI video of dropping feces on the American people?
Well, that's a question of taste, but he does mocking memes of him, yeah.
Right. I mean, I think taste is a big point here. And I think objectively, Gavin Newsom, like mocking Trump on social media or posting like AI photos of himself or something like that is vastly different than Trump pooping on Americans, including myself and the American flag in that video. I think even you, Piers, would agree that those are two vastly different things, no?
Now, I don't know about you, but that was pretty funny to watch when challenged on what sort of equivalent you could possibly draw with this absurdity of Trump flying a jet and dropping poop all over humans. You can see Piers just stumbling and stuttering all over himself because there is no equivalent to that. And then you see the goalpost shifting where it suddenly becomes anybody and everybody on the left who has ever made a funny meme or something about Trump is somehow an equivalent, which is totally ridiculous. And then the best example he can come up with after all that stammering is Gavin Newsom, which is not even an equivalent at all. Of course, Gavin Newsom is literally just mocking Trump to sort of illustrate how ridiculous it is. And when he gets that reaction out of MAGA, it pretty much proves his point that, like, if anybody else on the planet was acting this way, you would not accept this. But because it's Donald Trump, anything goes with these people. Now, I don't know how many of you are old enough to remember the tan suit scandal back when Obama was president. I think this was the second term. Something about him going to meet foreign leaders and instead of wearing black or, like a navy blue, he wore a tan suit. And this was like a huge scandal. Everybody on the right was just losing their minds over the fact that he wasn't presidential enough. Now, fast forward just a little over a decade later, and they're jumping over themselves to make excuses for why this whole jet poop thing was acceptable. But I'm really curious to see what these MAGA buffoons are going to say about it. So let's get back into it.
Isabel, I got to be honest. When I saw it, I thought, yeah, it's pretty tasteless, but it made me chuckle. I don't, it's a classic Trump stunt. Many people will think it's puerile and pathetic. Other people will laugh. The point that Anthony Scaramucci made, that you wouldn't see these other... I mean, of course you're not going to see Keir Starmer do it, or Anthony Albanese, or any of these guys, because they just are classic politicians who behave in a classic political manner. The whole point of Trump is he's the complete sort of antithesis of a conventional politician. And I can imagine there are a lot of Americans, and I'm talking about millions, who would have found that just amusing, right? And didn't read too much into it, just thought it was Trump basically retaliating to what he would have seen as a ridiculous protest by being Trump.
Yeah, of course there's going to be a big chunk of MAGA that's going to find this amusing because, let's be honest, there is a huge sector of the right, or at least as far as Trump supporters, who their entire identity is owning the libs.
Yeah, I think amusing is a good word used there, Piers. And ultimately, Donald Trump's sense of humor is not a surprise. We've known this man for upwards of a decade in American politics now, and nobody understands meme culture better than President Donald Trump. He's the architect of most of the best memes in history, but I don't think it's comparable to the memes, graphics, posters, calls for legitimate violence that we saw spread in city streets across America this last weekend from people of all ages on the left wing of the American political system, saying that anyone who supports Donald Trump, anyone who works for him, anyone who voted for him should be violently attacked, murdered, or assassinated because they are inherently Nazis, racists, or fascists. And that is the political rhetoric that I think we're having a very hard time reconciling with as we move forward in this country, particularly in the wake of Charlie Kirk's assassination.
Okay, so let me get this straight, because there are, probably by percentage, a small few amount of people at protests, probably any protest, that are acting a fool or, saying some egregious things or maybe mocking some things in a pretty gross way. That is not some general reflection of these protests as a whole. There were some 7 million people who joined these No Kings protests over the weekend. Now, I don't know about you, but I know a ton of people who went to these protests throughout the country in a lot of different cities. And everybody that I talked to, at least, talked about how peaceful and kind and just normal everything was. There was not any major violence to speak of, or at least not that I know of. This is the thing that they always do. They want to take some small outliers, of any situation ever that happens from the left and turn it into the whole picture as if that represents the entire, left side. They did it with the last No Kings protest. Unfortunately, there was, I think, one person who was shot and killed, which is terrible. But out of the 5 million people that showed up and all over the country, they used that to somehow paint a picture that that's what these protests are. That's just disingenuous.
And I think it's just an incredibly clear example, just like the thousands of videos, photos, protest posters, T-shirts that we've seen, Piers, across the country at these so-called Save Democracy protests, Save America protests, where you're watching people wear T-shirts saying "Make assassinations great again" with Donald Trump's head exploding. Public school teachers in Chicago simulating shooting themselves in the neck to celebrate the fact that Charlie was violently assassinated on an American college campus. You're watching people say, if I had the chance to kill Stephen Miller because he is a fascist and a Nazi, of course I would take that opportunity. People calling for the execution of Donald Trump, anyone who votes for him, anyone who supports him or works for him. This is a very dangerous time to be openly conservative in America. And the amazing thing about all of that is those people represent more than half the country.
That pretty much just proves exactly my point, that she literally just said with a straight face that she thinks that represents half the country. The irony that she's at the very same time trying to push this narrative that the language on the left is what's causing all of this hate and violence, while she simultaneously is trying to position half of the country, everyone that isn't on the right, as these violent thug criminals.
You keep talking about political violence, and we have study after study that shows that more political violence comes from the right wing, especially in modern American history, than it does from the left wing. So even if you just want to ignore the data, Question for you. When Donald Trump mocked Paul Pelosi getting beaten over the head with a hammer, was that okay? When Donald Trump Jr. did the same, was that okay? When Mike Lee, senator from Utah, mocked the murder of Melissa Hortman and her husband in her home on Twitter, was that okay? When Donald Trump didn't lower the flag for Melissa Hortman after he did, of course, for Charlie Kirk, was that okay? When he was asked about Melissa Hortman, he said, who is that? He didn't know who Melissa Hortman was, didn't even attend her funeral like President Biden did, former President Biden. So these are examples of political violence. The largest example of modern political violence comes from your party, Donald Trump, on January 6th, and then he proceeded to pardon all of those people. So you keep talking about political violence, but every major Democrat in office has condemned any violence. I would condemn anybody at these protests saying they want to take the lives of any conservatives for their beliefs. But your guy pardoned people who beat police officers over the head.
And this kind of just gets to the crux of it. The reality is that, these MAGA buffoons definitely just don't want to ever admit that their side is responsible for political violence, let alone the reality that the violence coming from the right is and has always been disproportionate. And no amount of them repeating and insisting that the opposite is true makes that not the reality. And spoiler alert, this Isabel Brown girl never once did give anything resembling an attempt at trying to explain or rationalize all the disgusting language coming from Donald Trump talking about Paul Pelosi, and she certainly can't justify Donald Trump pardoning 1,500 criminals from January 6th. Just today, there was news that one of the people pardoned from those 1,500, of which there were 600 who assaulted cops. One of those insurrectionists got apprehended today for allegedly plotting to assassinate Hakeem Jeffries. And I'm sure there will be crickets from this Isabel lady and the rest of the MAGA goons. But as always, I'm curious to know what you guys think, so drop your thoughts down in the comments below. And otherwise, that's it from me, because that's how it be, because Joey says so. See you on the next one.